So I'm coming at you again. So Congress just passed. Actually, no. As I'm talking, they're actually figuring out. They're actually voting on it. I think it's taken gosh since the weekend. So I've held off doing this video until I was sure that it was actually going to happen. But what I want to talk about right now are two things that's going on right now. One, I want to talk about the stimulus package that Congress is passing right now. It's going through the House and the Senate, like probably as I'm doing this video. And I also want to talk about what the Federal Reserve is doing. So those two things I think are really important for us to understand right now. And I thought it's best if I do this through a video. So here we go. And I'm going to try to, I think I'm going to, this is going to all my global students for sure, and I think I'm going to share it with my LA478 students. You all are honor students. I think you can handle this. Send me questions if you have it. But I'll go slow, and I will try to define as much as I can. All right, so here we go. All right. So, first of all, Congress has been working on a package to try to put money into the economy. Well, I should back up. Two things. One, if we are facing a recession and we're facing a global crisis like we are right now, and we also faced it back in 2008, the government wants to act. All right, so as far as the United States government goes, how the U.S. government would act in that way from an economic perspective is two things. One, Congress puts out some sort of stimulus package, some package to help keep the economy growing, right? To help keep the economy pumping. And the second thing is the Federal Reserve, right? Our U.S. Federal Reserve would have its own policies on how it wants to enact monetary policy, i.e. get that money moving, all right? So the two things I want to talk about are what Congress is doing and what the Federal Reserve is doing. So actions by Congress. So the package that's being passed right now, and I've waited till now to do this to make sure I think I got everything that's in the package, even though it hasn't officially been released yet. But I think this is what's happening. So first of all, $2 trillion. Oh, I meant to make this really pretty for you all, but I wanted to get it out there. So anyway, $2 trillion stimulus package. What's in it? $2 trillion. So I think I've covered with all of you national debt, right? We talked about budget deficits. We talked about, and when we talked about national debts, how those budgets, if we run a deficit every year, it stacks on top of each other and it keeps adding and keeps adding until we have this giant national debt. Our current national debt, which I've got here for you, $23.5 trillion as of today, right? $23.5 trillion. This adds $2 trillion stacked right on top of that. Right, so that's a lot of money. So just imagine that, $2 trillion. So what is this $2 trillion going to go for, right? That's a lot of money. Now, what I left off here in my analysis is the exact monetary values because they've changed over the past couple of days. You can look that up if you're really curious, but I just wanted you to know basically what's in the package. This first thing I want to talk about, the stimulus checks. These are one-time payments. Individuals, families are going to get these payments if you make under a certain amount of money. That's as of the latest. If you make under a certain amount of money, like an individual making more than $75,000 a year wouldn't get one. Families making more than, I think, $150,000 a year, that's the last I saw, wouldn't get one. All right, so these are for families making much less than that, and individuals making much less than that. Yeah. One-time payments. So basically the government's going to cut everybody a check, right? If you fall in that category, the government's going to cut you a check. Why? What's the idea? The idea is to get immediate stimulus money into the economy. People paying their rent, people paying their mortgage, people paying their car payment, people buying groceries and they've been laid off. All those things help keep the economy stimulated. So that's what those payments are going to go for, we hope, right? The second thing, unemployment benefits. This is I don't want to call it a minor thing, but it is one of the components of the stimulus package. Federal unemployment is capped. You can only get so much money. You can only draw unemployment for 6 months. I can't even remember what the normal is. Anyway, they extended the amount of money people can get, and they extended the time period people can draw unemployment. So they've expanded unemployment greatly so people won't be caught off guard if they suddenly find themselves laid off during this crisis. And that's a good thing. That means it'll keep people, keep money in people's pockets that suddenly find themselves in this position where they've been laid off, right? The third one here, small businesses. All right, so this is a program to get money to small businesses. I think it's businesses of 100 or less. I think that's the rule I saw. So let me first talk about, well, a couple things in this. All right, so let's talk about the Small Business Administration. So the Small Business Administration is a government entity that supports small businesses. Right, that's what it's there for. We actually have, I think, an SBA here in Buncombe County. There's another one up at, I think, Western has an SBA. So every county tends to have a small business administration, right? At least your large counties would have a SBA, right? So that's the first part of this. So most of this money is going to be routed through the SBA, i.e. the SBA is suddenly going to have access to more money than it's ever had before to be able to give more loans and more support to small businesses, right? Now, the idea behind these is, if you can read here with me, these loans are going to be used for payroll, rent, mortgage, things like that, to keep businesses afloat during this time. They don't want businesses to close. They don't want businesses to lay off during this time. They want to keep people employed, and they want to keep businesses functional, right? So that the goal is to do that. And the caveat here is a good one. If you're a small business and you qualify for one of these, and you get one of these, and you use it to pay payroll, rent, or mortgage, that loan is forgivable. So the U.S. government would not require you to pay that money back. If you use it for something else, then you have to pay it back. But if that's what you use it for, i.e. stimulating the economy, you don't have to pay it back. So the goal, actually, I wrote here, to keep paychecks flowing. Now let me talk about this other part right here, this word loan guarantees. So here's how that works. The Small Business Administration is not a bank. All right, so they're not set up to give loans. What they are set up to do is to give a small business a, quote, loan guarantee. The SBA will give that business a loan guarantee. The business then takes that guarantee to the bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, fill in the blank, right? They take that loan guarantee to the bank, and then the bank goes, wow, this is kind of a no-brainer. I'll lend you the money, because if you don't pay it back, the U.S. government will pay me back, right? If you don't pay back, the U.S. government will pay me back up to a certain percentage. Usually it's somewhere between 50 to 75, sometimes even 80%. I don't know what this one is going to be. I don't know. I haven't seen the details on this loan guarantee. But yeah, that's how loan guarantees work. Basically, it makes banks feel better about taking the risk on a small business loan, right? To give a small business a loan. So that's what these loan guarantees do. So it's basically just the SBA going, hey, we will guarantee, through the U.S. government, will guarantee that if you can't pay your loan back, we will pay your loan back for you to the bank. Right, that's how it works. So that's what that program's all about. And it actually, the SBA is a great program. It never gets a lot of funding. So to be able to have this kind of funding through the SBA is really, it's kind of a big deal. It's actually a good way to help small businesses. I hope small businesses take advantage of this, because it'll be a really important factor, or a really important program. All right, this next one is basically cash straight into the healthcare and emergency management system. Hospitals, I wrote some of them here, the food stamp program, child nutrition, hospitals, CDC, public health, FEMA, organizations directly related to fighting the virus. Money will go straight to them to help support them to be able to do that. This last one was the big contention. This is why Congress hasn't been able to agree and hasn't been able to pass anything for several days now. Direct loans. So the government is going to give direct loans. Means you don't have to go up here to the SBA to get a loan guarantee and then go to Wells Fargo or anything like that. The U.S. government is going to give large corporations direct loans. The U.S. government is going to be the lender for large corporations, like airlines. Airlines are going to be one of the first to get a bailouts. Now, all of you in my global class, remember the risk management PowerPoint I just posted I had a section there on the airlines, and I told you about the buybacks, right? How airlines had spent some of their corporate profits over the past few years buying back their stocks, because when you buy back your stocks, you have fewer stocks outstanding. That makes the value of those stocks go up. So that's what they've been trying to do. They had no idea this was coming down the pipe. But alas, well, I was about to say caught with their pants down. I said that. That's okay. It's kind of funny, isn't it? But that's exactly what happened, right? So they're like, oh my God, we just spent all of our cash reserves on our stock buybacks, and we don't have any cash reserves, and now there's a virus, and we're about to go bankrupt, right? So this will be the U.S. government paying back or paying out loans directly to corporations. Now, again, I said this was the big caveat, the big sticking point for Congress. Democrats, Republicans could not agree on this one. So these loans actually had to be repaid back. Remember up here in the Small Business Administration loans to small businesses, if you use it for payroll, rent, or mortgage, it's forgivable. You don't have to pay it back. That is not true down here. All of these loans must be paid back. There's no it is forgivable caveat to this one, right? So they all got to be paid back. They can't be used for strategies like a buyback, the one I just told you about, buying back your stock. They can't do that. They can't get pay increases or bonuses for executives or employees. You can't use it for that. And this one is very new. This is like the past 48 hours. This one's come out. There's as part of I think I spelled Treasury wrong. Sorry about that. As part of the Treasury, they're going to have this new position called the Inspector General, and the Inspector General and a committee, what I understand, are going to be in charge of overseeing what companies get these loans, how much they get, what their payback period is, monitoring the companies. So that's going to be this new Inspector General's jobs, to make sure this money goes to the right corporations and it's used correctly and it gets paid back. All right, so that's that one. This one, tax credits. So companies are going to get tax credits if they are able, or if they agree to, if they're able to keep their employees on. They don't lay off their employees. If they're able to keep their employees and make payroll for their employees throughout the crisis, then they will be eligible for a tax credit, and that's going to be part of the stimulus package. This last one, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, this one is monies specifically targeted for state and local governments. So, like, for example, the state of North Carolina, if it needs an influx of cash to help fight the virus in some way, if Buncombe County needs cash to help fight the virus, they would get it through the Coronavirus Relief Fund through the stimulus package. All right? Whew, that was a lot on one page. I know. Everything you're not supposed to do with the PowerPoint slide, I just did it. All right, actions by the Federal Reserve. So we've talked about Congress, and that was Congress's stimulus package. Now let's talk about the Federal Reserve. Now remember, the Federal Reserve is in charge of U.S. monetary policy. It is in charge of the monetary flow, the flow of money, the flow of the dollar, right? So whether it's through the U.S. economy or through the global economy, it's in charge of the flow of the dollar, right? Among other things, it does other things too. It sets discount rates, which we can talk about that too. I forgot to put that on here. Okay, so right now, what is the Federal Reserve worried about? So the Federal Reserve has the job of monitoring the economy and keeping it stable, right, for lack of a better word. So they're worried about deflation. Now, in class, we sometimes talk about inflation. Inflation is when prices go up irrationally. Like, prices are going to go up because that's just what happens to prices. But when prices start to go up irrationally, quickly, that's when we see inflation start to happen in the economy, right? So when prices, and that's something the Fed wants to guard against, irrational pricing. So instead of prices going up, the Federal Reserve is worried about prices going down. Right? And deflation is just as risky as inflation, because deflation means it's going to impact corporations. And if you start having deflationary periods, corporations aren't going to make money. If they don't make money, they don't produce. If they don't produce, they lay people off, right? And then there's the cycle of unemployment and a recession. So fears of deflation. So I wrote this here. So demand for dollars has never been greater around the world. Creation of trillions of new dollars to keep the global economy is essential. In other words, the Federal Reserve needs to keep the dollar flowing, not just in the United States, but globally, to prevent deflation. All right? Now, I wrote this here. So again, The Federal Reserve is worried right now about a recession. They're not just worried. We know we're going to have a recession. Right? We're going to have a recession. It's kind of a given. But the severity of that recession can be mitigated by the Federal Reserve based on what actions they take. All right? So in the big scheme of things, a recession will lead to decreased reduction, because if I'm a company and if we're in a recession, people aren't buying. If people aren't buying, I'm not producing, right? Because if people aren't going to buy, my production levels are going to, or my production capacity is going to go. I don't want to produce if nobody's buying, right? And if I'm not producing, I don't need all those workers. So if I don't need all those workers, I'm going to lay them off. Therefore, unemployment goes up, right? Recession leads to a devalued dollar. And while global, we haven't gotten there quite yet, a devalued dollar is going to impact imports and exports. And that's something you got to watch out for. It's not going to just impact imports and exports. It's going to impact things like commodity prices. And I know I've talked about commodities in both classes, right? How remember commodities, anything you can grow or get out of the ground and it's sold on a commodities market. Anything on the oil's traded on the commodities market. Grains, corn, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank. There's, thousands of things traded on a commodities market. So anything you can grow or dig out of the ground, you can trade it on a commodities market. So that's what we're talking about right now, because all commodities are traded in, I think some of you know the answer, US dollar. Doesn't matter where in the world you are. Doesn't matter if you're in India buying on the commodities market, you're going to buy it in dollars. That's just the way it is. So if the dollar is devalued, it's not only just going to impact our economy, it's going to impact the global economy, because all commodities are traded in dollars. And that's something the Federal Reserve has to be aware of, right? So action is important right now for them. All right. Why else is the Federal Reserve concerned and needing to take like immediate action? Falling stock markets, right? Because the stock market has been crashing so much that I think I've heard several stats here that it's lost all the gains it's made since Trump's been president. We haven't seen the biggest drop in the stock market like this since the Depression. It's in just a handful, like a week, it went back to its value from 2008. So it's lost a lot of value in the past week. So if stock markets fall, that means corporate values go down, right? Because if my stock is worth less, then my company is going to be worth less, because my stock is important to how I can access capital, right? My stock price. So decreased corporate value equals decreased stock price, right? And I'm simplifying this and putting it on a nutshell. There are, I'm sure, PhD dissertations out there about this very thing, but I'm going to try to give it to you as simply as I can, right? When you have decreased stock price, that company has decreased funds from stocks if they want to grow or expand, and if they're planning on using stock money or stock values in any way to grow their company or expand their company, or just strategize different aspects of their company, maybe R&D, maybe anything like that, those funds have just gone down, right? So you don't have access to those funds, right? So when you don't have access to stocks for expansion or growth, you're going to decrease production, right? The things you had planned to do, you're not going to do. The things you have rolling are going to cease. So you're going to slow down, right? When you slow down, you may lay off people, right? You're gonna be starting to impact the unemployment cycle, right? And again, I wrote cycle because this keeps going, and it's not just big companies; it's small companies too, right? So that's something the Federal Reserve is monitoring, is worried about. All right. All right, so the Federal Reserve has done a couple things. I read an article yesterday, and it said the Federal Reserve. People don't understand the Federal Reserve, so they don't talk about it. So you're not going to see it pop up on CNN or anything. Very rarely. Occasionally in a back article, I might find something. But people don't talk about the Fed because they don't understand the Fed. But I read an article yesterday that said the Fed is the unsung hero of how to fight this virus from an economic perspective, because the things they're doing are really spectacular. They're really great, but people don't understand them, so they don't talk about them, right? But hopefully I'm explaining this to you, and you might be able to at least carry on a conversation about it now. Maybe, right? All right, so actions by the Fed. They're doing several things. Yes, so let's just start with this first one. Corporate bond purchasing. Now, normally the Fed doesn't get involved in corporate bond purchasing. Now, when I say a bond, let's just start at the beginning. A bond is a debt, right? Now, let's just talk about debt. I'm just going to simplify this way down, right? So, a debt is something I owe. Like I can go to the bank, I can borrow money, and that's a debt I owe to the bank, right? A bond is the same thing, except instead of going to a bank to borrow money, I go to investors to borrow that money. Same thing. It's the same exact thing, right? If I went to a bank to borrow money, they would say, okay, well, Deena, you're going to pay it back over a 5-year period, and here's your interest that you're going to pay back, and here's your principal, and here's your monthly payment, right? And I would pay every month, right? Just like a car payment, right? Same concept. Here, same thing, right? But instead of going to a bank to borrow money, I am issuing a bond. I am selling that bond to investors, right? So I'm creating a debt, and the investor becomes my lender, right? And every bonds are usually good for 10 years. All right. So every year I have to pay back my bondholder interest, right? Interest on that bond. Interest. After 10 years, I'm going to give back or pay back the principal that investor let me borrow, right? The amount of the bond, right? So I will pay back the interest payments, and then after 10 years I pay back that principal bond payment, right? So that's how bond works. Corporations issue bonds, right? I want to raise money. I don't want to issue stock. I don't want to go to the bank to borrow money. I'll issue a bond, right? I'll issue a corporate bond backed by my company, and investors buy it. And then every year I'll give those investors interest, and then at the end of the bond I pay them back. That's how corporate bonds work, right? The Fed normally doesn't get involved in corporate bonds. It's in the investor world, right? It's in the bond market. That's what we call the bond market, right? So it's in the bond market, and the Federal Reserve normally doesn't get involved in the bond market. But what they're going to do right now, they're going to do two things. One, they're going to buy corporate bonds. So they're going to go out there and purchase some corporate bonds. They're going to purchase new corporate bonds. Those corporations that are trying to issue new bonds, the Fed said, we'll buy new bonds, and then we'll buy existing bonds. So they'll do both of those things for corporations. And why? They want to keep that money pumping. They don't want what we just, the last slide, right? All the things that could happen. They don't want that to happen. So they're going to try to keep money pumping into the economy, and buying those bonds as a way to give the corporations that jump start, that money, that influx of money that they still need, right? Now, city and states do the same thing. Buncombe County has bonds. State of North Carolina has bonds. In fact, the renovations of Owen and Carmichael are North Carolina state bonds. They're funded by North Carolina state bonds. The state of North Carolina issued bonds. Investors bought them. The state of North Carolina every year pays investors back the interest on those bonds, and then pays back that bond at the end of the term, right? So state and city governments have also issued bonds. So not only is the Federal Reserve going to buy back corporate bonds, they're going to buy back state and city bonds too. They want to make sure states and cities have the funds they need to fight the coronavirus, right? So that's what that's doing, making sure those states and cities get the influx they need of cash to be able to keep the local and city economies, the local economies, the state economies, the city economies, and those corporations moving, right? I said purchasing municipal. Municipal is another word for city, right? City or state. So when I say municipal bond, I'm talking about a state bond or a city bond or a local bond. All right. They're also going to purchase bonds, which on the market we call these securities, bonds that are backed by not the corporation, not a state like the state of North Carolina, but they're backed by something like a bundle package of auto loans, or a bundle package of real estate loans, i.e. mortgages, right? We call those mortgage-backed securities. So there's those kind of bonds as well, right? Called securities. I won't go into a whole lot of detail about those, but the mortgage-backed securities, the real estate ones, where am I trying to point here? The real estate ones were what got us in trouble with the 2008 crisis. All right, and I won't get into all that. I can do that maybe later if we want to, but I won't do that right now. But so they're going to buy not just corporates, not just municipals, but they're also going to buy these other bonds that are attached to these types of loans. Now, why is that? Like, for example, who issues these real estate loans? They're called mortgage-backed securities. Banks, right? So this bank, well, banks issue them. Actually, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac issue them, but it keeps money circulating in the mortgage industry. If you didn't have these bonds, then the pool of money for mortgages would dry up. So the Fed's trying to stop that too, right? They want to prevent that. So by buying up these types of bonds, they'll keep money flowing in those industries like the real estate market and mortgage market, right? The mortgage industry. Oops, yeah, nope, back, oop, nope. There we go. All right, so benefits. So if the Federal Reserve buys a corporate bond or a municipal bond or one of these other securities I'm talking about, if the Fed buys your bond, i.e. you're a corporation, the Fed buys your bond, or if you're a state government and the Fed buys your bond, you can defer those interest payments to the Fed for up to 6 months. In other words, we talked about those interest payments that have to be made. Well, those interest payments won't be even start clicking for 6 months. Means you get a reprieve for even thinking about having to pay back anything on those bonds for 6 months, which is really good because if I'm a company, the last thing I want to think about is having to pay the interest on it, right? Not right now, but until my production goes back up, right? Let's see. Companies that are expected to receive direct financial assistance under the stimulus package won't be eligible. So in other words, if you are one of those small businesses that are going to get one of those SBA loan guarantees, or if you're one of those large companies that's going to get one of those direct loans from the government under the stimulus package we just talked about, then you can't also have the Fed buy your bonds, right? You got to pick one or the other, right? Either the Fed can buy your bonds or you're going to get a loan from the stimulus package. So that's a caveat for that one too. All right. So we talked about buying back the corporate bonds and the municipal bonds and the other securities, right? So another thing, whoops, going in the wrong direction. The other thing they can do is something called quantitative easing. They use this tool all the time. During the financial crisis, they got really creative and really, the Fed got really creative and really active in quantitative easing. Now, quantitative easing, now remember that back here, oops, I keep going in the wrong direction. Back here, I'm talking about them buying corporate and city bonds. Who else also issues bonds? And I know we've all talked about this in both classes, the U.S. government, or governments. Governments issue bonds, right? Governments issue bonds. That's how we fund our debt. Do you remember having that very rough conversation that day, right? How we talked about the national debt and how we talked about our budget deficits and how we fund our budget deficits. The Treasury issues bonds backed by the U.S. government, which then we really can't pay back, which then we have to roll over. Remember that conversation? Yeah. So that's what we're talking about here is, so people have, investors, other countries like China, right, Japan, have bought U.S. Treasury bonds because we have budget deficits every year. So we have to issue bonds to pay for our deficit, right? So the U.S. government issues bonds to pay for that U.S. budget deficit, right? So what quantitative easing is when the Federal Reserve goes out and they buy up massive amounts of bonds. So they buy up tons of bonds from investors. They pay the investor off, and they sit there holding these Treasury bonds. The Federal Reserve is holding U.S. Treasury bonds, right? They buy them all back, right? And then they pay the investor. So what are they trying to do? They are trying to insert money into this the system, right? So if the more bonds I buy back, if I'm the Fed, the more bonds I buy back, I'm putting that much more money into the system. So there's more money circulating in the system, right? So it's a way to make sure money stays circulating. So they'll do one level of quantitative easing. They'll buy back a bunch of bonds. If they do it again, if they need to, they'll do it again. They'll buy back more bonds, and they'll keep buying back more bonds. Now notice this says unlimited. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Fed did quantitative easing, but they would have a set amount that they would buy back, and then they'd have to say, okay, well now we're going to have quantitative easing too. And they knew a new amount, a new program, right? Quantitative, I think it went up to quantitative easing 4, if I remember correctly. I can't even remember now. Here they've just said, you know what, we're just going to buy back treasuries until we don't need to buy them back anymore, until we're sure that there's enough flow of dollars in the system that we can keep buying back treasuries, and we know that dollars are getting out there, right? So they're going to keep up that program. This last one, I haven't found a whole lot about this, but I know they're considering a Main Street business lending program. The Federal Reserve only lends to banks. So understand that our U.S. Federal Reserve is it's it is the U.S. Federal Reserve is a membership body, if you, I don't even like to say that, of all the member banks. So your Bank of America's, your Wells Fargo's, your Chase, your Citi's, your all the other banks, even your small banks, are members of the Federal Reserve, right? So our Federal Reserve is actually independent. That's not true in other countries, but our Federal Reserve is independent. And our Federal Reserve only lends to banks. That's the idea, is let's make sure that banks, we will lend to banks to make sure banks have enough cash, and then banks will spur that flow of capital into the economy, right? So this is a business lending program, which is something the Fed doesn't normally do, but I wrote it here, it's a planned program. So I don't know a whole lot of details now, and they haven't rolled it out yet, but the idea is it's supposed to be focused on small and medium-sized businesses. It's supposed to complement the congressional stimulus package. Remember those SBA loans, right? And those other programs, and those tax credits. It's meant to complement that. In other words, it's taking loans to small businesses a step further than the stimulus package does. But again, hasn't been announced. When it gets announced, I'll maybe do another little video and tell you about it. So don't know about that yet. All right. Let's talk about stock markets for a second. So I know you've probably all seen it. You've seen the stock market. Oh my God, the stock market's crashing. The stock market's going crazy. And it has, and I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, it has fallen drastically, dramatically. Now, what does this mean? So let's talk about this. So I've got money in the stock market, right? I am not really panicked. Why? Because do I still own X amount of stock in X company? Yes, right? This is temporary. Will that stock go back up? Yeah, right? So I will sit on it. And as long as I don't withdraw it, right, now at its low price, if I sit on it, then it's going to go back up. Now, what's the danger? People panic, people sell. And maybe there's a strategy there, because maybe if you sell and you buy something else that's cheap, maybe you make money. I don't know, but I don't play that game, right? Because I'm invested for the long term, right? If I'm a retiree and I'm living on my interest, right, off of my investments, then I might be a little concerned, because what just happened to my interest on my investments? They went down, right? Or my earning, not interest, excuse me. My earnings on my investments, that just went down. So what I'm able to draw off of my investment accounts to live in retirement probably just got diminished, right? Because the stock market went down. So it's important from that perspective to get the stock market back up, so those dividends and those earnings get reposted, and I can live off of the interest or the earnings coming off of my portfolio, right? So that's a downside of that. So what's happening on the Dow? I hope this works. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh my God. Oh, excuse me. Oh my goodness. Okay, that's great. Loving how this works. All right. This is live. Yes. Great. It's live. It should show it. Yeah. Shows it as of today. So right now the stock market looks like or the Dow. So let me just pause for a second. What we're looking at is the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And I know I've talked to, I know my globals I've talked to, but in case I didn't do it from LA478, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is the top 30, I'll call them blue blood or blue chip companies in the United States. All right, so it measures, it's only 30 companies. It's only looking at the stock price of 30 companies like Disney, who else is in there? Oh my God, Apple, Microsoft, right? Caterpillar, I think Bank of America is in there, right? So 30 top companies, the strongest companies are in this list. And the Dow represents their given stock price added up. So we got all 30 companies, right? Total, what's this number down here? That's the Dow, right, at any given moment. So we have seen, so from that perspective, we've seen the Dow was at a height of 29.5. I think that may have been the record high ever. Like the Dow's never been that high, which was just back in February. Everybody see that? Now, February, coronavirus is already in China. We're not paying any attention to it, right? So the stock market's not too concerned yet. But then suddenly, boom, we start to see the coronavirus. Okay, here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. Stock market's not really sure what's happening, right? Coronavirus, right? Down to boom, right? Yesterday, the lowest drop in, right? I think that was yesterday's low. I think I get it right. Yeah. No, yesterday's low. I think that's the low. And it's, all right, if I can do it. It's the day. Okay, so it should be giving me 3 months. Okay, yes. So now what I want to do, this is what I wanted you to see. So as of 2 days ago, the stock market was at its lowest point ever, right? Or not ever, excuse me. The lowest point since 2008, right? Since the global financial crisis. Suddenly, oops, Congress passes a stimulus package. Look at that. Boom. Because what does the stimulus package tell the business world? We're back in business, right? There's money available. They're going to save us. They're going to bail us out. There's, they're going to try. They've got a plan to keep the economy growing. They got a plan to put money in people's pockets so that production doesn't fall, so that our recession is not quite as bad as it could be. So this is sending a positive message to the business community. Now, will this come and go? Maybe, right? We might see this come, especially if we see coronavirus numbers start to spike. We will probably see this drop again, right? Despite the stimulus package. So I don't think it's going to stay here, but this is how to watch. This is how to watch, and this is an interactive. If you want to watch this at home, this is an interactive. It shows live, right? An interactive thing. All right. So let me get out of here. What else did I want to say? Yes. Now, what's happening with the commodities markets? Remember, commodities markets are commodities are anything you grow or dig out of the ground. Your gold, your oil, silver, platinum, beef, chicken, wheat, corn, you name it, right? Those are commodities, right? So what's happening with the commodities markets? Now, remember I said, and I know global, we've talked about this, all commodities are traded in US dollars. So it doesn't matter if I'm in Australia buying corn from a Brazilian farmer, I'm going to pay for it in US dollars. It doesn't matter if I'm Saudi Arabia selling oil to, I don't know, China. It's going to be paid in US dollars. It's going to be priced in US dollars, right? So what's happening here? So there's uncertainty in the commodities markets, right? Because unless the U.S. economy is stabilized, that's going to impact the U.S. dollar. If the U.S. dollar is impacted, that's going to impact the commodities markets. Are you seeing that? Right? Connecting those dots, right? So if there's uncertainty about what's happening in the U.S. economy, that means there's uncertainty in the commodities markets, right? Is the coronavirus going to make the dollar drop even more? What's that going to do to commodities prices? So if there's uncertainty, that puts a downward pressure on commodities prices, right? Because suddenly there's less of a demand for commodities. People aren't willing to buy commodities, so it's supply and demand. If you've got something to sell and nobody wants to buy it, what are you going to do with the price of it? It's automatically going to fall, right? If everybody wants your product and you've got a limited amount of it, what are you going to do with the price? It's going to go up, supply and demand, right? Pricing, right? So that's what's going to happen. So if there's uncertainty, and people aren't buying commodities or commodities aren't selling, that puts a downward pressure on commodities prices. Prices are going to go down, right? The impact. If demand for commodities decline, prices are going to go down. Commodity prices are going to go down. And if I'm that farmer growing corn, I'm going to have less incentive to produce, grow, harvest, whatever. Maybe it's whatever, right? Therefore, if I have less incentive to grow, there may be a limited supply down the road. You with me, right? The possible impacts. If there's a limited supply, that ultimately could mean rising prices for commodities. So right now, while we might see, a decline in the demand for corn, right? Nobody's buying corn. The price of corn's really low. That's fine. But if the harvest for corn goes down, and that means the supply is going to be down come, I don't know, fall, right? Then if demand goes back up and there's no corn to be had, the price of corn is going to go up. You see where we are? Right? And that's going to go with every commodity. Now, I will throw in the fact that OPEC, I think we've talked about OPEC. I know both classes have talked about OPEC, right? We talked about OPEC, oil producing, exporting countries. Right. So if we talked about OPEC, and so what OPEC is actually doing right now, and they decided this week and a half ago or so, maybe it's been 2 weeks now, that they would increase oil production. Because remember, OPEC represents the largest oil producers. As a group, they control the oil market, right? So they represent the largest oil producers. So if OPEC, it's a group of countries that produce oil. Not every country that has oil is invited into OPEC. For example, Russia is not a member of OPEC. Russia and OPEC like to get along, but lately with this new deal, OPEC kind of left Russia in the dust because Russia didn't want to increase production. Therefore, OPEC said, well, we don't really care what you say. We're going to do it anyway. And OPEC did. OPEC increased production. So when you increase production for something, you increase the supply. And when you increase the supply of something, what happens to the price? It goes down. Remember, if you got a lot of something, the price of it's going to go down. That's why you're going to start to see prices for gasoline get really low, because OPEC a couple weeks ago increased production on oil because they knew the significance of making sure the economy stays functioning, and they knew the significance of gas prices, right? And use oil to make gas, right? So, God, so many little pieces, so many little caveats to think about here, right? So that's stock markets and commodities markets. What else? Oh, I think that's it. Yeah, okay, that's it. So let me get out of here. I think that's it for now. I'm going to try to give you some updates. Hopefully this was good. Let me know if you like this, because if this was helpful, this is a good thing. I can do this more often, no big deal. I think this is a little bit better than having an interactive live session, because then I can kind of walk you through the main points, and you can pause and take notes. All right. There, yes, I knew I had one more slide. Okay, so I did have a student, a global student, send me some questions. Here we go. Couple questions here. Let's see. So she wanted to know, what does contraction mean? So when you hear that the economy is contracting, that means it's decreasing. It's moving toward a recession, right? So an expanding economy means companies are growing, money is flowing, there's growth in the economy, production is good. A contraction means the economy is doing this, production is slowing, unemployment is a possibility, recession is a possibility. So that's a contractionary policy, right? Right now, the Federal Reserve has two options when it comes to policies. They can either have a contractionary policy or an expansionary policy. They want a contractionary policy when they see inflation in the economy, i.e. we're speeding up. The Fed goes, oh no, we don't want to speed up too fast. It can cause bad inflation. So it does a contractionary policy. It does different things to try to slow the economy down. Or you can have an expansionary policy, which is when the economy looks like it's starting to move toward a recession, which is what we have now. The Fed wants to push money into the economy, make sure money's flowing, so it can expand the economy. So right now we have an expansionary, the Fed is working on an expansionary policy, but what's happening, the economy is contracting, it's moving toward a recession, and the Fed wants to enact an expansionary policy to help it move out again. All right, so I hope that explained that. Loan guarantees, I think I did this one. How are loan guarantees less expensive than direct financial assistance? They aren't. A loan guarantee is simply that piece of paper the small business is going to take to the bank and say, here, give me a loan, and if I don't pay it back, the U.S. government has said they'll pay it back for me, or at least up to X% of my loan value. And the bank goes, wow, that's kind of a no-brainer. I'm willing to do that, right? So it's not really less expensive. It's just more expansionary, right? How do loan guarantees even work for larger corporations? Okay, so in case of the stimulus, I think most all of these loan guarantees are going to small to medium-sized companies. They're not going to the large companies. Large companies are going to get those direct loans. The small to medium-sized companies are going to get the loan guarantees. But that's not to say a loan guarantee couldn't be given to the large corporations. But that simply means, here's what it means, is I'm Delta, right? I'm about to go bankrupt. Nobody's flying because of the coronavirus, right? I need money. So either the government can give me money directly through a direct loan from the U.S. government, or I take a loan guarantee to a bank. Now I need a lot of money. How many banks are going to want to lend Delta Airlines a crap load of money right now? Probably not many. See, that's the difference, right? So those large corporations probably aren't going to be too successful or as successful if they were to take a loan guarantee to, say, Bank of America or Wells Fargo, right? So that's why those are coming directly from the government. If they default on the loan, who's left holding the debt? The U.S. government. You, the taxpayer. Right? How does the stock market crash create a ripple through the economy? I think I did a pretty good job with explaining that. When the stock prices go down, the companies don't have money. If they don't have access to new funds for growth and expansion, therefore they're gonna start to shrink in. They're gonna pull back on projects they had planned. They're gonna pull back on production. So they're gonna stop growing. If they stop growing, they might lay off people, or they might not. They might not stimulate the economy. They won't buy raw materials, right? So if they don't buy, just think about the auto industry, right? If the auto industry shrinks, they're not buying parts. So if they're not buying parts, then the parts manufacturers aren't working. And if the parts manufacturers aren't working, they're laying off their employees, and therefore unemployment goes up. So that's kind of the ripple, right? And I could do more industries, right? Yeah. How do stock prices falling affect the average worker? I think we did that one. Ultimately, it can lead to unemployment, because if I'm a company, I'm not making any money, I'm pulling back on growth, I'm not hiring, and not only am I not hiring, I might get to the point where I lay off, and that will start to impact unemployment. And if unemployment starts to go up, then production will go down because people aren't buying things, right? And then it becomes a cycle. All right. Woo! Send me your questions. I will try to put these on. I appreciate these questions. And hey, wash your hands. Tell your loved ones you love them. And oh no, I was going to say hug them, but maybe that's not a good idea. No, I still hug my family because we are confined to this house, except for the rare instance we go to the grocery store. Oh my God. Okay. All right. That's it for now. See ya.